So on your cushions when you arrived today, you found something that looks like this, the Shari Raimon. So on one side is the Chinese version, on the other side is the English version. We're going to be doing this today during our Nirvana Day ceremony. So typically what we've done here for Nirvana Day is to chant the Heart Sutra. And this year I'd like to add this verse. We're going to be doing the Chinese version, but we need to talk about the English version. So I'm going to do my best to remember what I was going to say. And beg your indulgence. So you have in front of you this English version. With wholehearted reverence, we bow to the relics of the true body of the Tathagata Shakyamuni, who is fully endowed with myriad virtues, to the Dharma body, which is the fundamental ground, and to his stupa, which is the whole universe. With deep respect, we venerate the one who manifested a body for our sake. Through the sustaining power of the Buddha, which enters us even as we enter it, we verify awakening. By means of the Buddha's spiritual power, we benefit living beings, arouse the thought of awakening, cultivate bodhisattva practice, and together enter perfect peace, the knowledge of the equality of all things. Now let us reverently bow. So this is the meaning of this chant. In his latest book on Mountains and Water Sutra, Hojo-san talks about the fact that usually in a training temple, when it comes to Parinirvana Day or Parinirvana time, we set aside the usual evening service, February 1 through 14, and instead we chant the Parinirvana Sutra, which is a bit long. And we do this verse. And there is, if you do this according to the regulations say it's also good to do that sutra one last time on the 15th in the middle of the night. I don't recall that we got up in the middle of the night to do it, right? But there are rules about how we do all of these things. There's a book called the Gyoji Kihan, which is our forms and ceremony manual. I'm in the process of creating one for Sanshin. But there is a standard Sodoshu version which tells us how to do all of these things. And it says on this day you do this, and here's how it happens. And so from 1 to 14, we do the Parinirvana Sutra and this text instead of the evening service. So in the rules it says, this should not be something that we do in an easygoing way, because we're offering something to Buddha when we do this text. So we're going to look at the content here, and a lot of this is going to be familiar territory for us, because this is really an opportunity to talk about the three kinds of Buddha treasure. And Hojo-san frequently talks about three kinds of three treasures, right? We have the manifesting three treasures, the maintaining three treasures, and the absolute three treasures. So all three of Buddha's treasures are here. So if you come to our Ryakusatsu ceremony, which we do once a month to renew our aspiration to follow the precepts, or if you come to Jukai, where people are receiving precepts and receiving a Rakusu, you will hear either Hojo-san or I read this text called the Kyojukaimon, which is Dogen's commentary on teaching about the precepts and conferring the precepts. And in there, he talks about three kinds of three treasures. So this is not unfamiliar to us. So with wholehearted reverence, we bow to the relics of the true body of the Tathagata Shakyamuni, who is fully endowed with myriad virtues. So this, of course, refers to the historical Buddha, the manifesting Buddha treasure. So Tathagata means the one who's thus come one. Shakyamuni means the sage of the Shakya clan, because he was born into a princely family. So this is the actual sort of human teacher, right? The true body of the Tathagata Shakyamuni, who is fully endowed with myriad virtues. So if you look around in the texts, Buddha is supposed to have had all kinds of wonderful qualities, wonderful properties. Certainly you'll hear about things like the 32 marks of the Buddha, which were physical manifestations. Like he was supposed to have blue eyes, right? Golden skin, very long earlobes, very long arms, webbing in his fingers. So he was kind of a special being. But there were also plenty of virtues which were not about the physical body, just about his understanding, his wisdom, his ability to teach, right? So in the beginning of this verse, we can reflect on the qualities that made the Buddha somebody we want to look to for some inspiration, or as a model for our practice. And and try to model ourselves on the virtues that he exhibited. To the Dharma body, which is the fundamental ground. So early on, this Dharma body, early on in Buddhism, this Dharma body meant what Buddha taught, right? It meant Buddha's teachings, that kind of Dharma. Later on in the Mahayana, it becomes something bigger. It becomes the reality of all beings as they are, right? So Dharma is the teachings, but Dharma is also how this universe works, right? It's just how things are. So this becomes much larger. This Dharma body is the fundamental ground. We have nowhere else to practice. But in this reality, with everything as it is, there's nowhere else to go. And there's nowhere else we can go. So this Dharma body is the fundamental ground of our day-to-day activity and our day-to-day awakening, right? So this goes beyond what Buddha actually said, although it includes what Buddha actually said. And in this way, this Dharma body also is Buddha's body, right? This is the maintaining Buddha treasure, because this Dharma body is the body we encounter every day. We're probably not going to meet Shakyamuni walking down the street, right? Because he died 2,500 years ago. What we do encounter every day is his Dharma body, which is everything as it is. And we ourselves as we are. And all things in this one unified reality. So we have the opportunity every day, just living our lives, to encounter Buddha. And this is not just when we're sitting on a cushion or doing a ceremony or wearing nice robes, right? This is moment by moment by moment, nowhere else to go. Here it is. There is no escape, right? Here's the Dharma body. So this is the maintaining three treasure, maintaining Buddha treasure. And this third piece to his stupa, which is the whole universe. So now we have the absolute Buddha treasure. Because this, so you may know, a stupa is something which contains relics, right? So it might contain ashes, or it might contain, if you're cremating a very special individual, sometimes supposedly you'll find jewels, right? Or special things in the ashes. So whatever the physical remains might be, historically, we might encase those things in a special kind of box or in a big stupa, a big mound, right? And you can see these things in India and around in other Buddhist countries as well. So we could say, well, that's a stupa and that's all they're talking about. But imagine if the stupa is the whole universe, there is nothing outside of this stupa, which contains Buddha's relics, right? So now this gets even bigger. Now we have the absolute Buddha treasure, which is beyond anything we can sort of think about. It's beyond our idea. We can't grasp it. We can't get around it. There's nothing outside of it. This is the unsurpassable Buddha way, right? And when we encounter a phrase like the unsurpassable Buddha way, we think, well, that just means my religion is better than yours. But of course, that's not what it means. It means there is nothing outside of Buddha's way. So there is nothing outside of this container for Buddha, right? We can't get outside of it. So not only do we have potentially Buddha's physical relics, and we have this Dharma body, all of us are Buddhas too, right? Because awakening is already here. So we're practicing not to acquire something we don't already have, but simply to be able to live from that place of awakening. Which means everybody we encounter is Buddha. All beings are Buddha. So there is nowhere outside of that. So imagine this universe as a container, although it doesn't have a boundary, for all beings and all awakening and everything there is about this practice, right? So we have something absolute. We have the absolute Buddha treasure. Through the sustaining power of the Buddhas, which enters us even as we enter it, we verify awakening. So this is this sustaining power of the Buddha. The words used for this are the same ones for like self-power and other power. It's that same diki. So if you look at this, when we get to this, we have this word diki. This is the same, self-power and other power. So we could imagine this as a kind of a magical power, like there's some Buddha out there that's going to save us in some way. So this translation says spiritual power, but this is not separate from our own practice, right? This is not separate from our own energy and diligence and intention. This Buddha's spiritual power. We're not separate from the functioning of this, right? This is manifesting right here through us. So our own daily life, our own daily practice is the Buddha's spiritual power. No separation. And by that means we benefit living beings, because we're not separate from living beings. Of course, by benefiting living beings, we're also benefiting this one, right? So through the power, if you will, of our practice, and the outcome, if we want to call it an outcome, of getting out of our own way, and manifesting this awakening which is already here, we benefit living beings. There's nowhere outside of that. We arouse the thought of awakening. I'm sorry, so the sustaining power of the Buddha, which enters us even as we enter it. So I think we can think of that in a provisional way, this entering into this power, because it's already here. We can't enter it and leave it, really. But as we engage with it, as we completely manifest it, as we completely become 100% who we are as awakened beings, we enter this power, and this power enters us. It means we're smack dab in the middle of it, right? As we do that, we verify awakening. So as we do that, we manifest awakening, and we demonstrate again and again and again and again that awakening is already here, that this is a wholesome path, that this is the means to liberate all beings, ourselves and other beings. Here it is again. Doing this with a Sangha, I think, is especially helpful, because it's difficult for us. This is a bit of an act of faith, right? It's difficult for us when we enter this path, we kind of set out on this path, to really know, because we haven't experienced our own awakening yet, what that's about, whether it's really there. This is where we need brothers and sisters and people who are a little bit farther along on this path, perhaps, than we are, to help us to verify that awakening is here, that it's a wholesome thing, that we can actually live from that place. I'm sure we've all had teachers or Dharma brothers and sisters who have given us some inspiration. We see how somebody lives, or we see how somebody is, especially perhaps in difficult circumstances, when we say, gosh, something's going on with that person, I want to be like that. Right? Sometimes that somebody that we know is a practitioner, somebody within a Sangha. It might be somebody that doesn't practice, but yet still has some equanimity, sees clearly, is able to act from a place of wisdom and a place of compassion in a really balanced way. Of course, that person is Buddha, right? If all beings are Buddha. We don't need to have a label about that. We enter into that power, and we verify awakening. If we are carrying awakening into the world in an upright way, imagine what happens if I see somebody who is walking this path or living his or her life in a very upright way, and I'm inspired by that. What happens when each of us goes out into the world, carries our practice, sits up straight, acts from a place of wisdom and compassion? Do we not spread that? Do we not share that? Do we not inspire other beings, other people, by what we're doing? We sort of can't help it. We're not out there to do that in an intentional way. It simply is the manifestation of the true self. So it's easy perhaps to think, well, now that I'm practicing, I need to be somebody special, right? I need to walk a certain way, say a certain thing. I need to impress people with the depth of my practice. Or I need to evangelize for this practice. This is so great for me, I need everybody to know how great this is so they'll practice too. Well, we all know sometimes that's not welcome, right? It's adding something extra. This spiritual power is already there. We don't need to add stuff. We don't need to poke our heads into it. We don't need to make it into something. We don't need to make it acceptable for other people. We simply need to walk that path moment by moment by moment, paying attention being Buddha, getting out of our own way. We don't have to, sometimes helping all beings is nothing more than that. It's nice to hold the door for somebody. It's nice to give money to a cause. If you can build a hospital wing, bless you. Sometimes helping all beings is simply walking straight, being kind, paying attention, being yourself. We've all got some piece of this spiritual power, which we get from Buddha and we give to Buddha because we're entering it and it's entering us all the time. We all have a piece of this spiritual power. I don't care if you've been practicing 5 years or 50 years. We've all got some kind of talent and ability. Our karmic causes and conditions led to something arising called this one, or you, or you, or you. And with those causes and conditions come talents, experiences, abilities, interests, things we can use to help beings. We've all got that power. So it's really, it can be very helpful to cultivate ourselves as leaders, or to learn to do certain things in a temple, or to learn to do certain things in our lives or on the job. There's nothing wrong with that. That's good. And we are also complete right now. I think everybody's heard that phrase from Suzuki Roshi about you're perfect as you are and you could all use some improvement. So we're all complete as we are. Buddha's spiritual power is already here. And there are things we can do to refine our ability to live from that place and to carry that in the world. And so this power is coming and going through us. We're entering into it. We're taking something in. We're giving something back. Because we know there is this circle, right, of giving and receiving. So through this we verify awakening. By means of the Buddha's spiritual power, we benefit living beings, arouse the thought of awakening, cultivate bodhisattva practice, and together enter perfect peace. So this perfect peace is nirvana. That's the jaku on this side, right? This perfect peace is nirvana. This is stillness. This is not getting tossed away by our stuff. This is being able to settle down in our zazen and outside of our zazen, and seeing clearly what's happening, and seeing clearly what's in front of us, and seeing clearly what's arising in our own hearts and minds, and watching ourselves getting hijacked, and saying, oh, wait a minute, I have a choice to do something else. To catch that process earlier and earlier and earlier before we're completely tossed away by it, right? Somehow there is a stillness that happens. Some of us have been sitting here for the last 2 days. So all day Friday and all day Saturday, we did our usual session schedule, 14 periods a day. So we started at 4 a.m., ended at 9 p.m. The more you sit in that sort of container and in that sort of circumstance, the more there is some stillness. And Sagan said to me as we were walking out the door yesterday, that last period was very peaceful. So somehow we had finally, after 2 days, settled. Right? So this nirvana is about seeing through our delusions and sort of blowing out that fire. If you look at the literal roots of this word, it has to do with extinguishing something, blowing out something. So we know when our senses go out into the world and encounter things, we can think of that as a kind of a burning fire. We encounter things, and then we start this whole process of I like this, I don't like that, I'm going to chase after this, I want to run away from something else, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, right? Somehow there is suffering, somehow there is dis-ease, unease, dissatisfaction, something is burning, right? In the Lotus Sutra, I think it is, we have this image of this burning house, we need to get people out of this burning house of delusion and craving and desire and unhappiness and dissatisfaction. Somehow, if we can settle and we can see through what's happening, we reach this place of perfect peace. So in some parts of this tradition, that means leaping off the wheel of samsara and not being reborn again in this world of suffering. And we can think about that way if we like to, but we can also think about just in this moment-to-moment-to-moment existence. How do I open the hand? How do I step back? How do I take a breath? and not perpetuate suffering. So my own suffering which is arising, can I see it clearly and not spill that onto other people? And if I'm with somebody who's suffering, what can I do to, if not ameliorate that suffering, at least keep it from perpetuating? Which is not always so easy, right? We see people in the world doing things with which we don't agree, and we may feel powerless to do something about that. It may be happening far away, it may be happening in circumstances in which we can't intervene, and we think, there is no peace here. Despite all of Buddha's spiritual power, there is no peace here. How do I enter into that? Sometimes all we can do is not perpetuate suffering by not responding to that suffering in a way which accelerates the problem. But we can't do that if there's no clarity here, right? We have to get to our own stuff before we, in some ways, before we can begin to take on the suffering in the world. And it would be easy to say, well, those parts of suffering are not my problem. You know, I'm going to deal with this one. I've got enough of my own to worry about. How can I possibly take these vows that say I'm going to liberate all beings? I can't even deal with myself. Well, it's not a reason not to practice, right? We will never get to the end of this practice. So Buddhism frequently reminds us our practice is always going to be incomplete. Our entering perfect peace is always going to be a bit incomplete. And yet somehow, on the basis of Buddha's spiritual power, we can go forward. So for us to think that, well, Buddha lived and died 2,500 years ago, entered Nirvana 2,500 years ago, and he's not here to help me, it can be a bit discouraging, right? We think, well, you know, he's not here anymore. But this verse reminds us there are actually three kinds of Buddha treasure, and Buddha's not gone. So of course, our early scriptures say when Buddha's physical body died, he was 80 years old, he got sick and he died, there was a lot of lamentation. His students were unhappy. Of course, their teacher had died. What were they going to do? And that's the time when Buddha reminded them, look, if you continue to practice, I don't actually die. He says, my disciples from this point forward have to continue to practice because that's what keeps me alive. That's what keeps me here in this world. So the fact that we're on a cushion, the fact that we're going forth into the world having some intention to live in an upright way means Buddha didn't die, which is really interesting. So these three treasures don't actually disappear. The story says Buddha lived and he died. Still we can encounter his Dharma body. Still we can encounter this one unified reality which contains everything Buddha said and did and everything we're doing and everything there ever was, right? Because there's no end to that reality. So together enter perfect peace, the knowledge of the equality of all things. So the equality of all things doesn't mean everything's identical. It doesn't mean we can stop paying attention because nothing matters. The equality of all things here is talking about emptiness, right? This is about all things not having a fixed and permanent self-nature which persists through time. This is about impermanence. So the one thing we could say that everything has in common, one thing that everything has in common is that it's changing. Everything is subject to impermanence. So we know everything we encounter, everything we can imagine, everything there's ever been is changing. And in that way, all things are equal. So it is equally not profitable to grasp anything. Despite the fact that we may think some things are more valuable than others, some things are more meaningful, more valuable, more helpful to this one, those are the things we want to grab. Some things are less helpful to this one, some things are harmful to this one or unpleasant to this one, and those are the things we want to push away. So, it may be important in our day-to-day lives to make those kinds of distinctions. This is not saying we should not make distinctions. That would be foolish and probably not possible. We certainly want to not have things in our lives which are toxic to us. Things that are toxic to us make it difficult for us to go out and do our bodhisattva work. So, we have to make choices. We need to eat food which is wholesome in order to feed this body to do our work. So, right, we have to make some distinctions. And at the same time, while we're carrying that, we're also carrying all of these things are impermanent. None of these things have a fixed self-nature. Everything's going to come and go. Even the things that I grasp, I can't keep forever. So then we can start to see what we're doing with that in our relationship with this Dharma body. I want this, I'm going to grab it, I'm going to perhaps do something unskillful in order to get it. Once I have it, I'm afraid it's going to disappear. I need things because somehow I don't feel complete, even though this self is one of those impermanent things, right, that we can't grasp. Doesn't have a fixed nature that persists through time, and yet somehow I think this is always going to be here, and I need to protect it, so I'm going to get stuff. If you get in my way, I'm going to hurt you, right? We can make mistakes. Not a way into perfect peace. And not a way into perfect peace for anybody else that's around us, right? Because we're not separate from people. What we're doing makes a difference to other people, right? So this knowledge of the equality of all things gives us a little bit of equanimity. At the same time that we hold this equality, we still have to make smart choices. This is our challenge as bodhisattvas. We can't live only in the world of emptiness, because if we did that, we couldn't help beings. And yet as bodhisattvas, we have vowed to help all beings, liberate all beings, enter all the Dharma gates, manifest the Buddha way. We can't do that if we're simply living in a world of emptiness where we say, oh well, everything's fine. People are suffering. Not my problem, right? We also, if we live only in the world of form, can get stuck in the things that are attendant on self-involvement, trying to protect ourselves, right? All of those kinds of delusions. We've got to hold both of these things equally. So this verse is inviting us, I think, to hold things equally. Because it's certainly saying cultivate bodhisattva practice. Arouse the thought of awakening. Benefit living beings. Those are things that happen in this body. This is the ground of our practice, right? We've got nowhere else to go. And at the same time, equality of all things. So Buddha's inviting us to enter into that intersection with him. He's still there, right? So we need to enter into that intersection with him. What would you like to say about this verse before we do it? And then I'm going to spend a minute just talking about actually how we're going to do it. First, let's talk about anything in the content that you'd like to ask about, question about. I think this is maybe a new verse for everybody, or most of us. Please.
Not exactly a question, but the phrase that says, the sustaining power of the Buddha which enters us even as we enter it, reminds me a lot of Dogen's wording that the Dharma wheel turns us and we turn the Dharma wheel.
Absolutely.
The two sides.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I just really like the image of this thing. It enters us as we enter it. It's like there's some dynamism there, but it's a big wheel. It's a big circle, right? So there's something coming in and there's something going out. There's no barrier, right? So we're like steeped in this power. I like it as an image. Other comments, other questions, things you'd like to bring up about this?
So, I started reading a book this week called The Making of Buddhist Modernism.
Oh, yes, one of my favorites.
Yeah, really,
oh, please.
Really interesting book. So it's sort of about how the Buddhism that, especially that we practice in the West, I guess you could say, is quite different from, traditional Buddhism. Almost to the point of being unrecognizable probably for people from Thailand or something who came here. And one of the points that is made is that in the past, people's sort of spiritual problem was what he describes as an inescapable framework. Mm-hmm. So in the Buddhist context, that's, you're reborn forever. How do I get out of this endless cycle of rebirth? And maybe for Christians, it was, I'm either going to go to heaven or hell. Like, what am I going to do about that? But now, in sort of the modern period, our problem is more about a lack of meaning or nihilism. And of course, in the previous inescapable framework model, the Buddha's Nirvana was really special because he's escaping that inescapable framework. But for us now, how is his parinirvana meaningful in terms of our own potential lack of meaning or tendency towards nihilism?
Well, you know, there is a teaching in this tradition that Buddha didn't actually have to die, but he chose to enter parinirvana as a teaching tool. So in that way it was skillful means, and was a means to get us to pay attention, right, and to practice and to understand that things are impermanent and things are changing, and we need to sort of practice for ourselves and pay attention to what we need to do in our own practice. So, yes, so the early teachings were that perhaps we enter nirvana, or the Buddha enters nirvana, sort of leaps off this wheel of samsara, doesn't come back anymore, achieves something maybe personal. You know, I've achieved my goal, I've ended my suffering, I've kind of leaped out of the world. And of course in the later teachings that changes a bit, because we have bodhisattvas who, although they could enter into nirvana, choose rebirth. So this 108 gates of Dharma illumination that I frequently talk about on Sundays is said to be the teaching that Buddha gave before he descended from the heaven he was in and took birth in this realm. Because supposedly this is what happens. So there's this heaven realm where all the bodhisattvas are, and they practice until they can gain awakening, and then the last thing they do before they descend is to make some teaching. So this 108 gates that I talk about is that, right, for Buddha. So somehow he chose to take birth in this form and teach for 80 years and appear to die and leave this realm. But yet somehow we have this manifesting and maintaining an absolute three treasures. So somehow we can find some meaning, I think, in that story goes on. And it's not simply a case of somebody lived and died and that's it. You know, there's certainly the legacy of Buddha's teachings in that things got written down, things got recorded, and we still find meaning in that. And that's helpful. And also, people like Dogen are teaching that's only a part of it. Really, his teachings, his life, all of our lives sort of go on in this, you know, in all the 10 directions. There's no, like, where does that end, right? So when we think about the karmic causes and conditions that lead to the arising of any particular being, whether that's Shakyamuni or us, where did that start? You know, where's that going to end? We don't really know. The fact that one of my ancestors got on a boat in Greece and got off in this country set some things in motion 100 and some years ago, right? I wouldn't be here like this if he hadn't done that. Well, so, and where's the beginning of that? And where's the end of whatever I may do? And the same will be true for you. So this physical body will come and go because all things are impermanent. But there's something which remains. So I don't know if we can take meaning from that. But I think it's encouraging, at least to me, maybe to you, to know that if I get up in the morning and I do some practice or I do something in this world, I can't possibly know all of the effects of that because it's happening in the 10 directions. And if the only reason I'm doing that is to get some kind of return, like I did something good, therefore something good should happen to me, it's going to be tough to keep going. Because we don't always know what the effect is. And sometimes we do something with the best of intentions and the outcome is not a good intention that we want. So, you know, it can be difficult to go forward if what we're doing is waiting for that sort of immediate reward. This is why vow and repentance are really important. So we have to continue to have the aspiration. We have to continue to arouse bodhicitta. We have to continue to arouse way-seeking mind and intention and continue to make the effort to plant good seeds because we don't know what the outcome is. So we can't base our effort on that. We simply have to do our best in this moment. This moment is all we have. So I have to do my best right now, trusting that the effects of this will somehow play out. And the next moment I still have to aspire to do something good. So in that way it's a bit encouraging because we can go forward on this path step by step by step, day by day by day, and think there's nothing happening here. Why am I doing this? It doesn't feel meaningful to me. I'm looking at this wall for the 14th hour today, you know. Like, what am I doing? We don't know. So somehow that aspiration has to be there. I'm not sure if that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
But that's what comes to mind for me, because it's so easy to just say, none of it matters. And what am I doing it for? But of course, we're not doing it for ourselves alone, right? We get on this cushion thinking, well, I'm going to ameliorate my own suffering. I'm going to deal with my own problems. That's why I'm here. This is the latest, kind of therapy. Let's try Buddhism this week. And then we sit down, and something happens. Or we hear Hojo-san say something, some turning word. We go, oh, wait a minute. This isn't about me. This isn't about me. Something happens. So it doesn't matter if we're wearing these things or not. Somehow we hear a turning word. We see somebody bow. We read something. We simply settle down long enough to meet ourselves, which we may never ever have done in our whole lives. And we go, wait a minute. Something's happening here. I don't know what it is. I have to have some faith, But I see a lot of people in this room around me if I'm a new person, and, something's going on for them, so I'm going to hang in there. It seems like a wholesome activity, and I don't want to be separate from that, right? Many people come to this practice because they've read a book or done some comparative religion in school, and they come at it with their heads. I think we all do that. We can't beat ourselves up for that. I think we all do that. Because we're not born into a Buddhist culture in this country. We have to acquire that knowledge somehow. And at least in my experience, a lot of Westerners are reluctant to come to a Sangha. I don't want to get mixed up with other people telling me how to practice. I just want to read my books and contemplate this in an intellectual way, or take this as a philosophy. And then I see it over and over again, because I'm sometimes the one who's answering the emails, that come into a Dharma center like this one. I finally figured out I need a Sangha. How do I get started? At some point we realize we're not practicing alone. We're practicing with all beings, and somehow Buddha is still here, and I'm in this universe of awakening. And what do I do with that? Right? So that's when we need to continue to show up and help each other as a Sangha, because that Sangha is, you've heard me say, there's a reason Sangha is one of the three treasures. What else would you like to say? Let me not hog the floor. Karnegis can talk, so. Other things from you this morning? Please.
I was just noticing, let's see, the fifth last, and then the fifth last, then the fourth and the third last. So arouse the thought of awakening, cultivate bodhisattva practice, and together enter perfect peace. Sort of kind of sounds like a capsule description of the way, the very kind of the components of practice.
I think that's absolutely right, and I think what we have to be careful about is it would be easy to see that as a linear progression. We start with A, we get to B, we get to C, and we're done. And of course, that isn't the way it works, right? We're doing all of these three things all the time. So we arouse the thought of awakening, we cultivate bodhisattva practice, somehow we touch nirvana, but we're not done because we're bodhisattvas. We are continually arousing the thought of awakening. We are continuously cultivating bodhisattva practice. So I think you're right. It is a sort of a capsule description of what's happening. And we have to be careful not to think that that's a line.
And I think also the fact that they mentioned together, and that's sort of more the Mahayana emphasis, maybe.
Absolutely, because of course, when the Buddha sat down under his tree and he woke up, he said, I've awakened together with all beings. right? So we can't help but awaken with all beings because awakening is already here. There is no way for me to say, well, my awakening is separate from yours, right? Not possible. So together, we're all in the midst of this stew of Buddha's spiritual power and awakening, so we can't help but all enter nirvana together, right? There's no one left behind in this practice. Other thoughts this morning? Okay, let's talk about the logistics of how this works before we actually get up and do this ceremony. So, typically what we do here is chant the Heart Sutra and an echo, and we do some bows along with that. All that's still going to happen, but after the Heart Sutra we're going to do this Shari Raimon. So, Hoshin's going to start us off. We're going to chant this thing together. We're going to get down to the last line, Konjo Chorai, and we're all going to do one full bow. And when we get up, Hoshin's going to start us off again, Ishin Chorai. We're going to chant this again, get to the bottom, Konjo Chorai. We're all going to do one full bow. So 3 times we're going to chant this, do one full bow. Right? Hoshin's going to do an echo, and we'll end as usual. Questions? Just follow along. Please.
Same like the Makahanya Paramita. Ishin Chorai.
Ishin Chorai Mantoku en Manchaka Nyorai Shinjin Shari. So he's going to have the Mokugyo going, and we're going to follow him for. Now, as I say, the rules say we don't do this in an easygoing way. That doesn't mean we rush, but please, like always, chant with some energy. Chant from here. We're standing up, right? So, you can breathe well and chant well. Hold this thing in front of you so that you're not folding yourself over. You can do this if you want to. And so please actually chant with some energy. Breathe well. Follow along. Please don't be timid. I get that this is unfamiliar and this isn't English, but these phonemes are pretty easy to read. So do your best. Have some intention. And I think the reason that Gyoji Kahan says this about don't do this in an easygoing way is this is an offering to Buddha. So it's an offering to all of us, right? But this is an offering to the being that got this whole thing kind of organized so we could sit here, right? So I mean, like, what other thing do we do that deserves more respect than this, right? So if you're not a liturgy person, bear with us. But actually, there's something really nice about the energy of this because it's kind of rhythmic, and having this many people in a room, something really nice happens. So please fully enter into that. It's quite a lovely practice. Questions about how this will work?
I just have another question.
Please.
At the end, will we do the 4 Bodhisattva vows?
We will do that now, before we get up. Yeah, so the rest of today is like normal. And then we'll do this ceremony. So we're going to need a few minutes after we finish with this portion of the day just to set up. Hoshin's going to do his announcements like usual. We need to light some charcoal, bring out some food offerings. So please don't run off, because then we can't get everyone back here. But in that intervening time, if you want to grab a chant book, if you don't know the Heart Sutra, move a little bit, that's fine. Just stay close because we're going to have some other things yet happening today. Everyone okay? All right, thank you very much. And we move on to our closing chant.